Welcome to a special episode of the Global Trade Show. I'm your host, Lawrence Christoffels. I've got the absolute pleasure now of having a great industry expert and a good mate, Jason Picknell. Jason, great to see you as always. How are you?
Great, thank you, and thank you for the invite.
Our pleasure. So now you've got some exciting news to tell the industry. I'll let you do it. You break the news. Tell us about Argocore.
Yeah, well, thank you. First and foremost, for those who don't know me, I've obviously worked with Lawrence in the past and been in the industry for about 30 years. And for the last 12 months, I've been sort of contemplating coming into market around software. And I've got the great pleasure of launching a new product to market called Cargoautix.
Yeah, so let's talk about, I'm going to break it up a bit. We've got some time. So let's talk about what inspired you. What were the reasons to come in with Cargoautix?
Yeah, sure. For those who don't know, probably 2009, I was the first person to integrate into the ICS system to do SAC clearances. And my first client actually was Australia Post doing that. And so when I actually integrated into the ICS system, it hadn't been done before for bulk clearances. And I just looked at it and thought, you know what, there's a lot of things that systems in the market don't do. And basically with the iteration of AI and a couple of other things in the market, I thought it's a great opportunity to reinvent what's happening. Certainly AI is an enabler to do that.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's go back and expand about your experience as well, because it's really worth talking about to explain the level of detail that you've had hands-on experience with. You're not just a software guy, you're an industry guy.
Yeah, I am. So I guess fundamentally, I'm the third generation freight forwarder. My grandfather had a transport business. My father was involved, and I have a few family members in the industry. My experience has probably been roughly 30 years, starting off as a runner in Sydney with International Freight Services. But more recently, I've been head of operations for Panalpina, and most recently, I was an executive at Cargoautix in Australia.
Yeah. So you've lived the challenges that importers and exporters face, and the reporting, especially here in Australia. I think we could all agree that when it comes to integration systems, we're sort of behind the rest of the world when it comes to some of our cargo integration capabilities.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge is, we have a very strong system in the ICS system, but fundamentally the last 6 years in particular have shown us that there's lots of disruption. And I don't think technology that's available to freight forwarders and customs brokers kept up with that. And so what we tried to do in the system is actually cater for that and start surfacing risks within the system, looking at the way that processes are run, and then sort of imagining how could we actually change that upstream. And so we've actually, I think personally, looked at it completely from the outside in, and changed revolutionary how it works.
That's exciting. And the other part that I totally agree with you, Jason, is that from an industry sector, I think the BCOs, the actual importers and exporters themselves, they're going ahead leaps and bounds with their technology. So a forwarder who's a service provider to those BCOs has to be able to keep up and be able to stay up to date with all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think so. One thing that we learned through COVID was expect the unexpected. And we can see, there's pandemic risk, there's trade risk, there's war risk. And so those early signals actually exist in the supply chain. But rudimentarily, what happens is, as freight forwarders receiving goods, we don't actually capture that until at the very end. So what we've tried to do is actually look at that upstream movement and say, okay, these signals are happening. How do we actually cater for that? And how do we collapse that process when it arrives? Most jurisdictions talk about a single entry process, or single window. So what we've done is we've said, okay, from an operational-led process, how can we actually do that? And so what we've done is collapse the process from 4 jurisdictions into 1.
Correct. Yeah. So I want to talk about, I know before we sort of started the camera rolling, we talked about how you came up with the name. I think it's a great story. Especially, can you tell the audience about how you came up with the master entity name, the company name, and then the software name?
Yeah, I think sort of fundamentally we looked at, we're trying to create a global intelligence layer. So it's actually what we believe a new layer within the industry. And we wanted to look at, what was, I guess, first out there. And, you can't sort of ignore Jason and the Argonaut's right, bit cheesy, but effectively the Argo was the first ship, and so we thought that was a great name to attract. Obviously my name's Jason, but also importantly it was the first expedition, and so Argo is really the foundation of what we're doing, and then the core is obviously the central decision making around that as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great story to tell as well. And, you know, it is. Yeah. It's. I wouldn't say it's cheesy. It's good. It's relevant. So it's, it makes sense, and it'll be a legacy that I'm sure you'll be proud of for you know, passing on to generations as well. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So, what's been the most challenging in getting to where you are so far?
Look, I think the challenge has been to ignore everything you've learned around freight forwarding and sort of pull the whole process apart. I've been very fortunate. I've managed to bring on board about 5 master's graduates and interns. And basically these are the guys that are obviously building in the latest technology. And to try and explain what we do from an industry point of view is very challenging. But it's also a very good way to actually reimagine how things could be, right? So that journey's started July last year, and we're now entering the new phase of the system. So we're stepping out of stealth and moving into UAT for market.
Yeah, fantastic, exciting times ahead.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what's your goals now for 2026? What are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, so we've built something that we think is quite incredible. It's still very much in development, and it will expand and ingest and get stronger and stronger. So as we step out of stealth, we're looking to move into UAT for the month of February and probably into March before we go live for wider market release. So at this point in time, we're looking to do a full market release towards the end of March. Yeah,
fantastic. Yep. So I think forwarders, especially recently, there's been a lot of changes to the market. I think that there's an openness and appetite to look at new alternatives, and obviously the timing wise seems pretty good.
Yeah, look, it's a little bit of coincidence too. Like, this is an idea that was formed back in 2009. Right. So when I was doing small parcel work, I looked at what I was doing with e-com and said, why can't we do that with air freight and LCL and FCL business? And it probably wasn't the right time, but AI's become a very good enabler to actually storyboard how things could be. Yeah. I think the short answer around it is it's not so much about what's happening in the market around software. It's more to do with the disruption-led market and the dynamics of how that's changed. Yeah. And I think just the way that we're doing things hasn't really shifted. And so that's why I looked at it and thought, you know what, I wanted to do this for a long time. It's the perfect time to do it. And also, it's probably the wrong direction to look at as is, and it's really looking at it what could be, and that's what we hope to release in the next month.
Yeah, totally fresh eyes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exciting. I think that the whole industry is being more and more pressured by their clients, the BCOs, around user experience and making sure that they can get communications faster, visibility faster, and cost competitiveness as well. So that's those 3 drivers, I'm sure, are top of mind when you're trying to.
I think even more so to that, Lawrence, is the risk. There's so much risk in what we're doing now. Like, there's lots of things outside of our hands that affect us, and so. We've moved more into a supply and demand market. We've moved into a disruptive market where decisions can be made while goods are in transit, and traditional freight forwarding doesn't really deal with that so well. So building an intelligence layer to sort of surface those risks early before goods are actually moving, or reshaping them while they're in transport, is really, really important. By the time the goods come here, there's so much exposure, and if you ignore all the warning signs and rely on the poor broker who's actually having to deal with that on arrival and then trying to explain that to the client, it's very, very challenging. So what we've tried to do is create a new layer and say, hey, listen, there's all these signals happening and it's telling us a story. We're not saying you should do this, we're saying just be aware of these signals and try and sort of build it into your process. The other thing that we've done is we've actually not relied on the customs ICS system. We've actually built our own customs ICS system.
Right, how's that work?
So basically what we're doing is we're reimagining, if you built ICS today, what would it look like? Yeah. There are things like piggybacking. There's all these risks for customs brokers and freight forwarders that we're actually building into the system platform and sort of highlighting those risks through the journey as well.
Wow. So almost like I suppose a digital twin of the ICS. Would that be something similar?
Yeah. Look, I don't want to take anything away from the ICS system because it's very robust and it does a fantastic job, and it's been around for 20 years, so it's obviously very solid.
Yeah.
But there's just lots of risk as a customs broker or freight forwarder that the system doesn't flag because that I guess duty of care falls to us as the industry. So we've tried to build that in there to sort of surface those risks to the customs brokers and freight forwarders as well.
Awesome. Well, mate, congratulations. I know how much work, blood, sweat and tears you put into it. And
a lot of long hours.
And I'm sure there's a bit more to come yet.
Absolutely.
But I know how passionate you are about the industry and how much you believe in creating a real change for the better.
Absolutely.
So congratulations, and look forward to seeing you grow more on the journey and coming back and sharing it with us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to it. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Jason. Cheers.
Thank you.